So my topic is sensory integration. I go with lots of statistics, research, and one of the things that I would also include is that is something the research is missing is what the stakeholders need. Now, when we look at research, one of the problems that we have is we do not look into the consideration what the parent actually need from an intervention. That is something which we have to really look at it. That is what I'm going to talk about. A lot of parents' perspective, so that we understand that what they really need out of an intervention, especially sensory integration. So when we look at the statistics, okay, so you look at the statistics, 5 to 16% of children who go to school, regardless of the diagnosis, they may be typically growing, may have sensory processing disorder, right? And the number goes up when you're looking at children with autism. It is 56 to 70% they have sensory processing disorder. Now, what does that mean? It puts a question to us. If it is 70% of children with autism have sensory processing disorder, it also puts us a question that 30% do not have it, right? Correct? Now, how do we know that the 30% do not have it? If we do not have a systematic way of evaluating them, right? I'm not an SI fanatic, that every child with an autism spectrum disorder walks into my clinic, I would label them that by default that they have a sensory processing disorder and enroll them into an intervention. No, it's not going to work that way. So you have to have a systemic way of looking at children and trying to arrive at a conclusion that whether a child has a sensory processing disorder or not. So that's the question. So I'm going to put some few foundational understanding so that we understand what is SI and what is not SI, and then look at research, parents' perspective, and then we will close. Okay, so the first foundational understanding is many of us are not 100% sensory integrated who are sitting here. That doesn't mean that all of you require an intervention. Now, I'll give my own example. I'm vestibular sensitive. I cannot go to places like Wonderla, MGM, Kishkinda and take rides there. It freaks me out. I cannot go to a crowded mall. I cannot stay there for more than 30-40 minutes. I get restless. So does that mean that I have to go and seek for an intervention? Absolutely no. There are many of you here probably would say that I would not like to have a particular type of food. How many of you are there? There are certain things I cannot even if I think I would puke, right? So do we all need sensory integration? Absolutely no. So what is the deciding factor to look for an intervention? What is the deciding factor? The deciding factor is this. It affects your occupation. Now, what is my occupation? My occupation is to be a father, a professional, a husband. If I'm able to, and then there are certain social roles I have. If I'm able to fulfill all these social roles, and I'm perfect, I don't need an intervention. Now, that is the way you need to keep looking at even children with autism. Okay, so what is the foundational understanding? The second foundational understanding. So first one is, all of us are not 100% sensory integrated. That doesn't mean that all of us require therapy. That's number one. And number two is, sensory integration is just a tool in a box. So do not go to the family and say, SI is the one-stop solution for your child with autism. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. It's just a tool in the box. That means that there are other tools in the box that you require to fix things. You may have a behavioral intervention, you have a speech and communication interventions that also would work with children with autism, right? So when I said SI is a tool, we need to know how to use the tool, right? When we do not know how to use a tool, then what happens is everything becomes very generic, and then we may not see better outcomes in our children. Okay, what is the foundational understanding 3, right? is that every behavior has an underlying reason. We are not treating the behavior, we are treating reason behind the behavior. I'll give you an example. Okay, this is this particular child watching a TV and suddenly starts standing on a sofa and jumping and flapping hands. Right? Very familiar? Very familiar? Right, what do you think is the problem? Watching a TV, stands on the sofa, jumping on the sofa and flapping hands. What do you think?
Excited.
Excited? Okay. Anything else? What triggers? Emotions? Proprioceptive input? Okay, because there are different perspectives, that is what Dr. Kannan said. The 6 and 9, you see it? You need to understand, I can quote many reasons why the child does it. Unless and until you identify the reason, you would not be able to treat them effectively, right? Now that's my point. It could be a problem with vision, it could be a problem with proprioception. Somebody said it is just an expression of emotion or communication of watching a TV, or it's a sensory overload, too much of information from the screen. Correct.
And I think when you identify that, you probably then identify
Correct.
what we have to
Correct. Now, yes, what she said is right. Now, what is my point here is, my point here is to tell you that there are many reasons to it. Now, what you need to do is you need to have a careful, vigilant observation and evaluation to identify what's going on. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now, simply you see a child jumping on a sofa, think, oh, this is a proprioceptive. Let's work on proprioceptive is not going to help you. It's not going to lead you anywhere. You need to have a larger perspective of looking at it. So, whenever you see a behavior, you need to be vigilant in identifying an underlying reason for that behavior. Okay. Now, what is the fourth foundational understanding is, in a sensory integration intervention, right? Now, active engagement and purposeful play is the most important ingredient of sensory integration. If this doesn't happen, that probably you are not using an SI methodology in your treatment. Now, having said that, how many of you use body brushing? Anybody uses body brushes? Does it cause an active engagement? Absolutely no. How many of you use a body waste? Does it cause an active engagement? It does not actively interact unless and until you find a purpose to it, right? So when I talk about, there are many intervention methodologies. So-called SI interventions are not basically an SI intervention that is proposed by Gene Ayers, right? Now that is why you see a trademark. When you look at the research, you always see a trademark called as Ayers sensory integration. It's called as ASI. Now ASI brings a lot of rigorousness in research, number one, and then it has a fidelity. Fidelity in application. You go and look at the fidelity measure in Ayers sensory integration, it's mind-boggling. It's very challenging to fulfill all the fidelity of it. But it is important for us to distinguish between the SI that is proposed by Gene Ayers and all the other interventions that is available in the market today. All the other passive approaches that is available in the market today. Now, the Gene Ayers sensory integration is very distinct. It has an active engagement and purposeful play in all your intervention sessions, right? So that is very important. Okay, so 4 foundational understandings. So we come to a point, what is sensory integration? So one is active engagement of the child. Second one is an individually tailor-made session. If you have seen one child with an autism, you have just seen one child with autism. If you're going to give the same kind of a principal approach to all the kids coming into your clinic, it's not tailor-made, right? Yes? If I see two children with autism, my intervention would be different for both the children because their underlying problems are, the underlying sensory integrative problems are different. So I'm not going to apply the same principle for both the children. So it's very important that it is tailor-made. The most important thing about ASI is this. It uses only 3 components of sensory inputs. One is vestibular, tactile, and proprioceptive. That's it. You don't use auditory, you don't use visual in your treatment sessions. But what does ASI believe in is use vestibular, tactile, and proprioceptive as a way of influencing auditory and visual systems, right? So keep that in mind. So if I'm using a listening program, integrated listening program, that is not SI. That's not SI. SI is, the SI that is proposed by AIDS is basically involves vestibular, tactile, and proprioceptive. Okay, so now this is the chart that I use whenever I work with my children. This is the pattern of sensory integrative dysfunction. You see that there are a lot of things there. I don't know whether you're able to see it clearly. The top one is talks about the motor planning issues, that is vestibular bilateral integration, somatodyspraxia and visuodyspraxia. These are motor planning difficulties. And then you have the sensory perception difficulties, which can be vestibular, proprioceptive, tactile, and visual. And then you have sensory reactivity. Now, this is how you understand the SI dysfunction. I'm not going to go and dwell on SI dysfunction, but I'm going to take you in understanding how the SI works in a treatment session, right? Okay. The most important thing is now, how do we understand? Now, many years ago when I saw this particular family, they asked me a question. It still stays in my mind. So every time when I approach a family, that I always address this particular question. This family asked me, Sundar, we go to a speech therapy, we know what to expect out of a speech therapist. We know that the child has to improve on receptive communication, expressive communication. Then there is a social communication. We understand all that. But when we come to a sensory integrative session, we do not know what to expect out of it. We understand that there is a problem in vestibular which goes over beyond our understanding. We understand proprioception, but we do not know what to expect out of a sensory integrative session. And I said, okay, this is wrong. A family should understand what to expect out of a session, right? Now look at, so I put these 2 things together. One is called as the proximal outcomes. The other one is a distal outcomes. What the most important thing for the family is distal outcomes, not the proximal outcomes. Now what is distal outcomes? The distal outcomes is the family comes and says that, no, my child sits better in the class for a circle time. And the family says that, no, in a meal time, my child sits and interacting with the family on a dinner table or on a meal table. And the family says that in a park, my child is able to interact with all the playground equipments, right? And the family says that, no, my child can dress himself, my child can color, right? Now, those are called as distal outcomes. Now, that is where I would be looking at to create a change. I'm not going to create a change just like that. I cannot come, when the family walks in, I would not going to talk about, okay, the vestibular system was bad there. Now we have fixed the vestibular system, now it is good. Now, that is not what we are going to speak. What we are going to speak to them is, how did I use this sensory integration methodology to bring changes in participation? How I've changed the way the child addresses daily routines. How I've changed the way the child is addressing the activities of daily living. How I've changed the way the child interacts with the peer groups. How I've changed the way the child is interacting in the school. All that is what is going to make sense. And that is what I would be looking at when I said about distal outcomes. But is the proximal outcomes are not important? Proximal outcomes are definitely important for me, because that is where I'm going to work. That's where I'm going to work. But where do I see the outcome? Distal. But proximal outcome is something which gives me an idea, okay, a child has a problem in sitting in a circle time that's because of this problem in the sensory system. So when I identify the problem in the sensory system, but I'm going to measure it in terms of distal outcome, right? So now imagine a scenario, right? I wanted to improve dressing, right? I want the child to learn dressing. Then I've identified that child has bilateral integration disorder, vestibular bilateral integration deficit. Now what is bilateral integration? Using both the sides of the body coordinatively. Now if I do not have both the sides using coordinatively, I would not be able to do dressing. Right? You need both the sides of the body to dress yourself, right? You have to put it inside the sleeve and then get your shirt together and then button it, right? You need both the sides of the body, right? So what is my proximal outcome? The proximal outcome is I want to see a change in the vestibular proprioceptive system. That's my proximal. So that is where I would be working. And the distal outcome is dressing. If the child is able to successfully do it, I have achieved it. But what is the methodology I've used? The methodology I've used is sensory integration. And what is the systems that I've used is, in my treatment session, is vestibular and proprioceptive. So what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to kind of link the proximal outcome with distal outcomes. You got it, right? So that's what I would be doing it in my treatment session. Okay, I do not know how many of you can see this. This is a research that was conducted by SCAF in 2015. They kind of give us a great deal of understanding the participation and the underlying sensory problems. So one of the examples, if you see ADL here, now if a child has a problem in activities of daily living, look at the sensory components that interfere with activities of daily living. You have sensory reactivity, sensory perception, somatopraxis. So it kind of gives you an idea what is an underlying problem. So that is where I would be working at. You got it? So this is a research-based information. This research, what they did is they called the families in and then asked the families to identify 160 goals, 160 goals that they wanted to see their children would improve with autism. So out of that 160 goals, what they have done is they have categorized and identified sensory integrative problems in this 160 goals. And I have put the categorization here. You see the categorization is more of ADL, play and education and social participation, rest and sleep. Got it? So where do you look at? So what I need to improve in sensory integration is I would look at these participation challenges, right? Like ADL, play, education, social participation, rest and sleep. This is what the families would come and ask you. When you're applying sensory integration or any intervention, what the family would come and ask you is this. I want my child to be independent. I want my child to play well like in other children. I want my child to sleep well. How many of you find out problems pertaining to sleep? My child does not sleep well. Undisturbed sleep. He wakes up in the night, in the middle of the night, and he doesn't go to sleep. So look at the sensory integrative problems that is associated with sleep. Now that is where I'm going to work. Okay, so this is a research, right? So okay, we are talking about so much. Is there a research behind all this? Lots of plenty of research. Dr. Kannan talked about systemic reviews, and most of these are systemic reviews. So when you look at these systemic reviews, sensory, of course, the AIRS model of sensory integration have great deal of impact on improving. Look at this, autistic behaviors, decreased caregiver assistance, that's ADL, improved play, language, sensory motor, perceptual, and cognitive skills. So the moment you read it, don't think, oh, sensory integration improves language, so let's only start with sensory integration. No, that's not the point. Sensory integration gives you a foundational base for the child to be available to learn different things. You understand that? That's how it is. That means still SI is a tool in a toolbox. It's not the entire one-stop solution for a child with autism. Okay, now the question is, this is what I was talking about. There was this one research in 2015. They have done this 160 goals. I put those, one of the graphical representation before. They have examined 160 goals, and then really saw what the families actually need. Now, 47% of the families said we wanted to see an improvement in participation. Now, participation is what? I go to the park and then play there. That is participation. I go to the school and appropriately engage in a school environment. That is participation. I go to a birthday party and appropriately engage in a party, the way the other children do. I go to a restaurant and shopping mall and behave in a certain way that appropriate to that particular environment. Now that is participation. So 40% of the families come and say that this is what we want. And 50% of the families, 50% of the goals that no family wants the therapist to work is activity performance. I want my child to dress. I want my child to sit and eat food. I want my child to carry out the daily routines in a way that is meaning and sensible for the families. Right? So that is 40%. And then the 3% of goals that are related to body structure and function. Only 3% they come and say that, no, I want to see a change in the proprioceptive system and vestibular system. You got it? Now that is not where we are working. So every SI session is like that. Every SI session is, I would look at, okay, what am I improving at a participation level? What am I improving at the activity? How am I going to improve the activity performance? Okay, so there is another study they have done in 2000. They looked at what was the family's expectation out of a treatment session, right? So they categorized into 3 themes. The first theme is, the family said, okay, we want our children to have an improved social participation, self-regulation, and perceived competence. This is what the family's expectation is. They wanted the child to regulate well, have a great social participation, communicate with the other peer groups, and play with peer groups, and then have a competence that they are capable of doing certain things, like other children. The second one is learn strategies to support their child's self-regulation and participation. How many families would come back to us and say, teach us something that we would be able to manage it? How many times you have seen families telling, okay, we are going on a vacation for the next 2 weeks. We are so worried how to take care of this kid. Because we are going by flight, I do not know. It's a 4-hour flight, whether he's going to sit in the flight. Now, what are the strategies that we are trying to help them to learn so that they become competent enough to work with their child? That's number 2. And number 3 is, how many times we understand a challenge? How many of you give home programs? You give home programs, right? And you expect them to do it. When the family goes back, there are 1,001 things they have to take care of. Correct? So, we do not understand their challenges as they go in. Okay? So, one of the studies I have not put here is done looking at home programs that families of children with autism would do. If you give 100 activities, they are not going to do, right? So this one particular study, I don't remember the study. Probably I would go back and then try and find out. The study says that a maximum of 2 intervention strategies that they can apply at home. Families can. A maximum of 2 intervention strategies they can apply at home. Imagine, so if I'm going to give them the list like a grocery list to them and say that no, do it, they are not going to do it. The compliance is going to be poor because we need to basically fundamentally understand the problems of the family. So these are all Western studies, but it really makes sense to us, right? When we see our families, it looks very similar like our families. So look at what's the family's expectations are, right? Now there was another study which categorizes families' expectation into 6 major themes. One is the constant flexibility in the part of a family to accommodate child needs. It's very difficult, right? Very difficult. Now, how many times the families always say that, no, we have compromised with our restaurant, we don't go to a restaurant anymore, we don't go to a movie anymore, I don't go to a grocery shop anymore, I don't go to a shopping mall anymore, everything is online. Whatever I want, order online, because it's extremely difficult to be flexible. And when you look at flexibility, it's become even more challenging in unfamiliar places. If it is at home, it's easy to manage the child. But what happens in an unfamiliar place? What happens if I take the child to a mall? It becomes extremely difficult to organize the child in spaces that are huge. So you see a very maladaptive behavior when they are in such kinds of places. So the family has to constantly be flexible. So that becomes extremely challenging. If the family has a sibling, think about it. They always come and say that, no, I don't have enough time to take care of the other sibling. I don't pay attention to another sibling. So these are the things that we need to be very sensitive about and working. Handling children in unfamiliar environments. Yeah, yes, of course. Many years ago, we organized an SI workshop. So we got in this particular child for a demo. Okay, and then the child's teachers were sitting, the special educators were sitting to see what is going to happen to this particular child. So we had a makeshift sensory integration unit for the participants to see. The moment the child walked into this makeshift sensory room, he was all over the place. He was jumping on the trampoline, going all around, and then it was very hard time to control. At the end of the demo, there was a question and answer session. The special educators, the teachers who were working with him said, we have never seen him like this. We have never seen this child like this. He was a very quiet child. He comes in, sits in the classroom, does it. But what happened today? Why he's all over the place? The question is here. Unfamiliar environments. The environments are new for them. The environments are novel for them. They behave in a very certain way or a very unpredictable way, right? So that's possible. And third one is difficulty in completing family routines. Very challenging, right? If they are working parents, dealing with children with autism, imagine. Morning you have to get up, you have a window of 1 hour to get yourself ready and make the child ready and then go to a intervention center. It's going to be very challenging, right? And then constant attention to the child with autism. All the time, safety and attention is what the paramount importance for the family, right? And then look at the constant vigilant about child's behavior, and then family develop strategies to cope up with. These are the areas that families are always looking at. But what we are so glued to vestibular, proprioceptive, and tactile, we are not looking at these challenges that families are encountering. And that is what we need to work on. So what is that one particular thing I use in my thing is, I use something called as data-driven decision making. I always obtain data to make sure that I'm working with a child in a specific way. It makes sense to the family. I'm not going to be very generic on my treatment intervention. So what I use is data-driven decision making. So there are 8 steps in data-driven decision making. I'll give you an example so that we easily understand it. Okay, so this is a model that I use it in my clinic. So I would give you an example. Okay, a case example is Ara. He is a 6-year-old boy with ASD. What is his strength? His strength is he is very good at puzzles. How many of you know children who are very good at puzzles? You would always know it, right? Now, what does that say about me? Probably I think that no, this child is very good in visual praxis. He can look at it and then he can really do it. Right? So still I have to do an evaluation to identify is he good at visual praxis. Now, if he is good at visual praxis, that's going to be my strength. I'm going to use that in my treatment intervention. That's number one. So what are his challenges? So this is based on the parent interview. The family said that no, he has a very difficult, he cannot hold spoon. At 6 years, he cannot hold spoon and eat food. He is not coloring in the school. And then he cannot use scissors. Okay? So when if a family comes into my clinic and then say, my child has proprioceptive and vestibular dysfunction, treat him. I would say, no, I'm not going to treat it. What is your problem? What is your child, what is the problem? What your child cannot do? Let's start from there. Families have gone to many intervention centers. They are more familiar with terminologies than you. Right? Yes? So I would always go back to the basics and say, well, what is the problem? So this particular family said that very limited play skills, problem using different equipments, does not interact with peers in school, and parents are concerned about his safety, right? That's because he's constantly running and then. So what do? First we do an assessment and create an hypothesis. Look at these assessments. Now, these are the assessments that I use in my in the clinic. The first one is a sensory processing measure, and second one is I use structured clinical observations. That's number 2, and then 3 is informal SIPT. SIPT is sensory integration and praxis testing. So I use certain components of it. I would not use all the components of it based on the requirement. So what did I identify is this particular child has a problem in tactile, proprioceptive perception, and somatopraxis. 3 things. So he has a motor planning deficit, he has problems in tactile, he has problems in proprioception, right? So once I determine it, this is only a sample thing of how I look at it and then work on it, right? So what is the goal? The goal is I want this child to color in the class. Sit and do. You give him a sheet and then color it. Okay, so, and then use scissors in the classroom appropriately. That's the goal. See, the goal is not to improve. What is the goal? The goal is not to improve tactile. The goal is not to improve proprioception. That will come along the way, but the goal is to work where? Participation. Look at the goal. The goal is work at participation, right? So let's go, that's the goal, and then we start the intervention, okay? Now you have 2 things. One is the challenge, the other one is the strength. The challenge is he cannot color in the classroom. And what is the strength? Visually is super good, right? Now how do I use my intervention now? In my intervention, what are the sensory systems I need to work? It's there already, right? Tactile and proprioception. These are the 2 sensory systems that I would work with. Number 1. And then what else I can work with? What else I can use it as a strength? The visual system, right? So what we did in the intervention is we said, okay, we are going to build something. Because that he is good at, right? He's a very good in visual praxis, so we are going to build. So what we have done is, we have done this climbing activity, and then we are going to build textured blocks. We have a textured blocks to build, climb, and then build something on a higher level so that he can go and build with the textured blocks. Okay, there was a textured mat where he climbs on up, and then put it, and then make a textured blocks there. So what are we doing? We are creating a play out of it. That's number 1. We are using his strength, that is building. And the third one is we are using both the proprioceptive and tactile systems in the session. And then see how we can build. Now that is how an SI works. That's how an SI works. If you does not follow this particular rule, SI doesn't work. You cannot bring a child with an autism spectrum disorder and say, oh, you're an autism spectrum disorder, you must definitely have a sensory integration problem. And then you cannot enroll and keep on giving them proprioceptive vestibular body brushing and weighted jacket, and then nothing happens over a period of time. When Dr. Kannan said, okay, there is always these are long-term interventions, right? Everything that we do or ASD is a long-term intervention. You also need to consider growth factors. I always say that if given 1 year longitudinally you are treating a child and then you see only a minuscule of improvement, probably that's a growth factor. Over a period of time, the child has learned a skill. Your intervention has to make a difference. When it makes a difference, it would make quickly. In our clinic, probably we see an intervention. This is not research. We expect to see an effect of an intervention in 4 to 6 weeks, not more than that. If we are not seeing a change in 4 to 6 weeks, probably we have an error in our hypothesis. We have to go back and then reevaluate and see what we need to really do to bring a change in children. So that is how it is. So what is a key point? I've not talked about sensory integration, in depth about the subtypes of sensory integration. But what is the point that I'm making here is look at participation. If you cannot connect participation with sensory motor issues, in your evaluation, that child is not going to make progress in sensory integration. You got my point? But you got my point? You will have a children who would have a true fine motor dysfunction. You will have a challenge in fine motor. Say for an example, you have children with developmental coordination disorder. They would have fine motor problems. You cannot apply sensory integration there if they do not have an underlying sensory motor problems. Now, what do you need to do? You need to actually teach them the skill. You have other approaches to do it. But if you have an underlying sensory integrative dysfunction, then what you have to do, you cannot teach the skill directly because that's not going to work. What is going to work is to look at these sensory systems and work on these sensory systems. Thank you.